The Baltimore Ravens got heartbreaking injury news on Tuesday as Darius Washington has been lost for most, if not all, of the 2025 season with a torn Achilles. We talk about the top options to replace him, both free agent-wise and internally. All that and more coming up on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I am your host here with you, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, and we are here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, thanks so much for being here today on this midweek edition of the show, making Locked On Ravens both a part of your day and your first listen each and every single day. Free and available on all podcasting platforms. So in video form on YouTube, you can hit the like and subscribe button. In audio form, you can follow along and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. We're a 5-day-a-week plus more daily Ravens show. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Sam Njoku of the Ravens Talk podcast is back with us here today. And Sam, this certainly has taken a turn from what I initially had planned for us. The unfortunate news, Darius Washington dropped about 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern time on Tuesday. He has been lost for most, if not all, of the season with a torn Achilles. Just, first of all, gutted for Darius. Thoughts and prayers out to him and wishing him a speedy recovery. But, what were your initial thoughts and reactions when you first saw this news come across your timeline?
Man, that guy can't catch a break. I mean, that's just my first thought. I mean, he finally got healthy, had a decent enough season where he was getting some consideration for some money, had a good chance to have a breakout season in the contract year, and then this happened. So it's very unfortunate for him. Prayers out to him. Hopefully he's able to recover enough where he can get a solid contract with the Ravens or another organization when his contract expires. But yeah, his likelihood for the season is definitely in doubt due to that injury so close to training camp. And my second thought was, what are the Ravens going to do now? I mean, I was so high on Malaki Starks, and the reason for that being that they can go back to being this 3-safety defense that has been so formidable the past few years. Now they have to look elsewhere, perhaps, or maybe internally for options to get ready for the upcoming season.
Yeah, and just a couple of points here just on an Achilles injury. Obviously, modern medicine has advanced recoveries in a lot of different ways. This is still probably the very best, a 6 to 9 month recovery for Darius, maybe 9 to 12 months. And we don't know, again, there hasn't really been a lot of information put out about this, at least at the time we're recording this episode. We don't know if it was a partial tear, was this a full ligament tear. So obviously that will vary in terms of the timeline that he might have. I know a lot of people are pointing towards Cam Akers a couple of years ago where he came back 5.5 months after his Achilles tear. He didn't really look the same there. I know people point to Kobe Bryant's injury as well. He wasn't supposed to be back at that point either. And, Baltimore generally does take the conservative route when it comes to these timelines and making sure they're not getting anybody on the field prematurely. One, because it doesn't help the player, obviously, and it doesn't help themselves either. You don't want a player out there that can't perform to his maximum ability, and it's just not fair to the player to have him out there playing when he clearly is not himself or 100% healthy. So I'm personally not expecting to see Darius. It would be a very pleasant surprise if he was out there, but again, he would have to feel like himself. And Sam, honestly, it kind of reminds me of Keaton Mitchell a little bit, where even if he was back, it might still take him a little bit of time to trust himself. So it does look like Baltimore is going to have to pivot. It's unfortunate based off of what we saw Darius do last season, and that was the break he caught. Injury-wise, it's been a struggle for him over the course of his career, but put it together was one of the key catalysts in turning that Baltimore defense around. And one of the things, and I'll ask you this question, Baltimore has a lot of clutch players on their team. To me, Darius felt like the clutchest of them all down the stretch. That Russell Wilson forced fumble, the Texans hit on Joe Mixon. Did you feel like Darius was always in the right spot at the right time? Because it felt like he just, box score stats aside, I mean, that dude just did so much for that defense.
Yeah, he was always ready to make a big play. I think that's what his main, attraction was for the roster. He's not the most athletic guy, not the tallest safety. He's just a guy that can hit hard and a guy that can be where the ball is when the ball is thrown or when the ball is received by the running back. I mean, he's just that type of player. So definitely a guy they're going to miss. They're going to want to make sure they have a guy that is another heat-seeking missile, somebody that can get to the ball carrier, get to the ball when necessary. But yeah, that was his MO, is to be that guy that will be there when the Ravens needed him the most. And that defense certainly could use a safety like that. They're glad they got that out of him last year, and they were hopeful for another return in 2025. Unfortunately, that's not going to be the case.
Yeah, and I think it's awful for our Darius, obviously, with his contract situation. And you mentioned, Sam, earlier about how, it really reminds me of a J.K. Dobbins situation where, he was fighting for a contract. Health was the big issue with J.K. There's his Achilles week 1, and he had to sign a prove-it deal with Los Angeles where he did prove what we all knew, which was he's a very talented player. But that thing, it keeps with you over the course of your career. It follows you. Some outside options within the organization are certainly a possibility here. Right now, and we'll talk about internal options in the second part of the show, your safety room is Kyle Hamilton, Malaki Starks, Bo Braid, and Sanusi Kane. It would feel like Baltimore would want to add to that. Now, the available free agents, I said this on the live stream I did yesterday. I'm just going to put this out here right now. Marcus Williams is not coming back, all right? He's on this list. No. I don't even think he's eligible to come back. I literally don't think Baltimore can sign him for a full year. So that is just out of the equation. We're not going to talk about that. Others, though, Justin Simmons is a popular name. Julian Blackmon is a popular name from the Colts. Jordan Whitehead, Quandre Diggs, old friend, Chuck Clark. You have Jordan Poyer, Kayvon Wallace, Marcus May. So it's not the best list of safeties I've ever seen, right? Certainly the Ravens aren't looking for another Kyle Hamilton addition, but just for someone to replace that skill set. Does anyone immediately pop out to you with that list I just mentioned?
Well, there's a reason why they're free agents, right? I mean, they're not, talented enough to be on the team right now. Doesn't mean it doesn't have much to contribute to an organization. Justin Simmons obviously is the name that'll come to mind. He's a little versatile. He's played a lot of strong safety in his career, a lot in Denver. He's played some free safety. He's that guy that can be rangy and be that guy that gets in the thick of things in the line of scrimmage. Maybe not as much as Kyle Hamilton is, or maybe even Darius Washington to that effect, but he is versatile enough to play that position. I think they wouldn't miss much of a beat. Chuck Clark's another interesting name. I don't know if the love lost between the two, considering the contract situation, may be a little difficult, but there is familiarity there. It wouldn't take much for him to get acclimated to the defense, so I think he'll be another option.
And I think, to me, the important part about a Simmons, and this, honestly, we were having the same conversation last year because everybody wanted the Ravens to sign Justin Simmons last year too. To me, it's just going to come down to money and role. Like, obviously, Simmons is the best safety available. I think it'd be awesome if the Ravens were to bring him in, but he signed a $7.5 million contract with Atlanta last year. And if he wants a role in this Baltimore defense, where I think with Washington going down, there are certainly more snaps to be had. And I don't think, we're kind of not in the era, Sam, especially with this Ravens team, where if you are not a quote unquote starting safety or starting on the defense, it doesn't mean you're not going to get a high percentage of the snaps. Like, there are still snaps to go around here. But if Simmons wants to be the guy in a defense still, which who knows, or if he wants more money than some of these other guys, that's probably not a fit. You mentioned his versatility. I probably wouldn't trust him in a single high role all the time, but, he can come down in the box. He can do a lot of good things for you. I know that Julian Blackmon is that other guy that a lot of people are talking about where he can play all over the place. And coming out of college, out of Utah, he was someone where he had the previous experience at corner, and obviously Darius, they were using him in the nickel as well as in the safety spot. Now he has experience all over the place. I think the Ravens will probably prioritize versatility, one, but they have to prioritize which safety is going to be the best fit to let Kyle Hamilton roam. You mentioned that right at the top, where you love that Malaki Starks pick. And even with Nicky Manwari and everything we were talking about, all these safeties, it was, hey, let's free up Kyle Hamilton. Let's get him back to that Swiss Army, that jack of all trades guy, like the Swiss Army knife type of player. Justin Simmons can do that for you. So can Julian Blackmon. But I think the versatility, I wouldn't even be mad at a guy like a Quandre Diggs, for example, who has that versatility. I think it would just come down to a balance for them. Do they want to spend all this money on a safety? Because we've talked about it, Sam. It's not just safety now. We've talked about them getting a fifth defensive lineman for a little while, maybe a couple of other depth signings here that like to carry in some cap space. So if Simmons and Blackmon are at the top end of that price range, they might have to settle in quotation marks for a guy like Quandre Diggs, which would not be the worst option in my opinion. You mentioned Chuck Clark and the comments he had for Baltimore once he signed with the Jets. Kayvon Wallace has some versatility as well. I'm not sure. I mean, Jordan Whitehead also is solid. I'm not sure I'd kind of dip into that pool of like the mid 30 guys, like a Jordan Poyer, Rodney McLeod, etc. But I wouldn't. How much capital are you putting into this for Darius Washington's replacement if they do go outside the organization?
That's a very interesting question. Yeah, it depends on how excited they were for the concept of having Kyle Hamilton be that big nickel guy. Are they willing to spend $5 million on a safety who, is still a free agent? Probably they can barter and get something lower in the $2 to $3 million range. I think they'd be happy with that. Certainly not over $7 million. Not paying for a safety when you already have two bona fide safeties in Kyle Hamilton and Malaki Starks, who you just spent a first round draft pick on. These safeties can price themselves out of the Ravens, price range, so to speak, as far as what they're able to bring in, because they do have some talent inside. I'm sure we'll talk about later on inside the facility that could, take a couple of snaps away. But I think the Ravens will be better served if they get another proven safety. I know they've had difficulties with free agent safeties in the past. We just talked about Marcus Williams, Eddie Jackson. They haven't had much success. So I will hope the Ravens do their due diligence in making sure whoever comes in is the proper fit, who's ready to be that third safety. But yeah, I'm not sure the Ravens are going to be spending too much money on this. $5 million max. Any more than that, I think you're kind of pushing it.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect them to either. And honestly, I think that might push them out of Simmons in his range. As we know, he will wait until the proper opportunity presents itself for him. We saw that last year with Atlanta. And I would be fine with them settling for a Diggs or a Clark, or even, Von Bell was someone who had a couple of good years in Cincinnati. Obviously was a Saints guy before then. And he's bounced around a little bit. Baltimore does not need the best safety in the world to come in and replace Ardarius Washington, but I do think they need a veteran option, and I talked about this on the live stream as well that I had yesterday. If you want to trust some of these guys internally, which we'll get to, that's completely fine. I like the internal guys, but you can't bank on the fact that it's going to work. And if it doesn't work, you need to have, I think, a safety blanket, an option. If it doesn't work out that way, someone who has experience. So even if you don't plan to use the guy, and again, I think this will probably eliminate, if you have this mindset, a Justin Simmons, Julian Blackmon, Jordan Whitehead, some of those top options, you would need to find someone who is okay being a backup while the other internal options get those snaps. But if it doesn't work out for those guys, having a veteran who you can at least throw out there and try it. Like, that's some of the things that Baltimore didn't have last season, where they signed Eddie Jackson. It didn't work. Marcus Williams, they exhausted all their options before the midway point or just after the midpoint through the year. The option of a veteran safety, regardless of who it is, I think should be brought in. Doesn't have to be the best, but it just has to be someone, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't have to be like a bona fide all-pro safety to come in there. Darius Washington, as good as he was last year, he wasn't an all-pro safety. He wasn't a bona fide Hall of Famer out there, but having somebody that you can count on, depend on third and long, who's not going to make the pivotal mistake, is going to screw up and keep an open lane for Jamar Chase to make it a 55-54 game in Monday Night Football or what have you. Getting a safety like that to come in and really solidify the group is important. Not so much knock your socks off with his athleticism or playmaking ability, but somebody can go out there and play football. So I think that should be the Ravens' mindset. If it's Justin Simmons, great, that's awesome. His pedigree, but if not, there's other guys on there that I think can do the job. It's just that the front office has to go out there and make sure they make the right decision.
Yeah, Simmons would be great. Julian Blackmon would be great. I think Jordan Whitehead would be great. Quandre Diggs. Like, you have options here. I remember even during that Marcus Williams offseason, there were rumblings about Tyrann Mathieu and Marcus May. They ended up going with Williams, and, that went the way it did. But, there are still solid options for you. And you're right, Sam. They didn't lose Kyle Hamilton. They didn't lose Roquan Smith or Marlon Humphrey. Ardarius is certainly a loss, and I'm not trying to diminish that. But there are pathways for the Ravens to certainly overcome this in multiple different ways. And coming up, we'll talk about the internal options, because Baltimore has a couple of really young, intriguing players that could step up to fill Ardarius Washington's shoes. So stay tuned. A lot coming up on the show. First, the show is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. Player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Now, this Wolves-Warriors series is super intriguing to me. Obviously, no Steph Curry in this one for the Warriors, at least not right now. And this is a 3-1 lead for the Timberwolves. The Timberwolves are looking to close it out in 5. They are 11.5-point favorites at home. So if you believe in Anthony Edwards over, Rudy Gobert over, even a Jaden McDaniels over, it might be a good time to go get in that action on FanDuel. Plus a $200 bonus bet there. That adds to the excitement if your first $5 bet hits. So if you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you get $200 in bonus bets. Make everyone more FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Back on Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher and Sam Njoku still diving into the Ardarius Washington news. Super unfortunate. And again, thoughts and prayers out to Ardarius. And he got thoughts and prayers from even Geno Stone sent him thoughts and prayers. So obviously he is, receiving well wishes from all around the league. But now the Ravens, with their pivoting, we talked about some of those external options. Well, that's not the only route that they could go here, Sam. And we know the Ravens have a couple of very intriguing young safeties. Kyle Hamilton and Malaki Starks, we know those guys are getting snaps. They're not replacing Ardarius Washington. They're going to have roles of their own. But Bo Braid and Sanusi Kane are the other two safeties on the Ravens roster. A lot of people love Bo Braid here in Baltimore because obviously the Maryland connection. Sanusi Kane as well. He's someone that, look, he hits people. We saw that on special teams. He hits people. And actually, when it comes to his PFF grade, he actually qualified as the 41st out of 171 qualifying safeties in 22 snaps. Now, 22 snaps is not a lot of snaps, all right? I don't want to say, this huge body of work. It was not a huge body of work. But how confident are you, Sam, with the Ravens signing a lesser veteran option and turning the keys to that Ardarius Washington position over to Bo Braid and or Sanusi Kane?
I'm not confident at all. I want to be very confident in having those guys come in there in year two. Now, that's not to say they can't do it. I mean, we've seen what Bo Braid can do in limited action in preseason. And I was a fan of Maryland, so I've watched him play throughout the years. And we know Harbaugh loves safeties that can hit. Kane is definitely one of those guys that can do it. So it would not surprise me if the Harbaugh let Ravens go that route and keep Bo Braid or Sanusi Kane in that third safety spot. But I will be much more confident, especially after what we saw last year, if we get somebody that we know understands coverages, can play, has seen snaps in the past, isn't just a guy coming in learning how to play football. Even though year two, you would hope that these two safeties would be getting a little bit better. But, man, I would really enjoy it if we had some solidifying options at safety come in and be that guy. Another option that some people have talked about, but not really as much, TJ Tampa, a guy who, the Brandon Stevens moved to safety after a while as well. Tampa certainly has a skill set that may intrigue the Ravens to move to safety. I wouldn't push that button quite yet. I don't think he's had the opportunity to be a corner yet in this league. So, but that is an option where potentially the Ravens could go that route as well. I still think the best option would be to get a free agent safety and bring him in, somebody who you would expect to start. But yeah, I think, again, if they go that route with Bo Braid, Kane, I'm going to lean on the assumption that they see something in him that we haven't seen yet. Because again, 22 snaps, these guys hasn't played a lot of football, at least in 2024. So it'll be definitely a throw in the dark for a lot of Ravens fans to have that optimism for these guys. Much rather see a veteran safety come in.
I think Simmons, or honestly Julian Blackmon, who again I mentioned, it does have that nickel versatility and does have that corner versatility, something that Ardarius could do as well. You can try to replace the guy one for one. It's not going to happen. What I mean by that is I don't mean just like, he was the best player on the Ravens defense. You can't replace. No, what I mean is skill set wise, right? You're going to find a safety that does hopefully a lot of what Ardarius can do, but there are going to be some things he's better at and some things he's probably worse at. It is going to be what it is. But to me, I think that Bo Braid can contribute. I think Sanusi can contribute. I was actually going to ask you about TJ Tampa, so I'm glad you brought that up too. I'm going to get big brain though. I'm going to get super big brain on this because with the three safety look, and I'm just in this scenario, I'm going to assume they sign a lesser safety. So a Quandre Diggs, for example, maybe Kevon Wallace, Marcus May, one of those guys. Trenton Simpson, I think, might get an uptick in snaps here. And what I mean by that is you talk about these three safety looks, Sam. The Ravens don't, with Ardarius, Kyle Hamilton, and Malaki Starks, don't have to traditionally play those two inside linebackers on the field at all times. Obviously, you can go heavy dime packages, heavy DB packages. But with those guys out of the equation, or I guess Ardarius out of the equation, maybe the Ravens feel like they have to go back to that. Now, this is big brain because I don't really think the organization trusts Trenton Simpson right now. And I feel like they don't really trust him even is a full 2-down player, let alone a 3-down player. And his snaps, I feel like, are going to regress anyway. But In my big brain scenario, if the Ravens want to go with that veteran, lesser type of safety, and they say, hey, Trenton Simpson in coverage, hopefully it'll be a year 3 leap for him. I think that, it's possible. It's possible Trenton gets more snaps. Do you agree with that, or am I crazy right now?
No, that's exactly what's going to happen. I think if the Ravens don't go the 3 safety route, they have no choice but to have Trenton Simpson be that, and then just turn from a kind of a nickel-based defense where the nickel is probably a third corner, and they have Trenton Simpson out there opposite Roquan. I think that's going to be the move. I think that, of course, moves Kyle Hamilton to that deep safety role again, have Malaki Starks on the opposite side, maybe play a little more single high, cover one more often than not if you really trust your corners. But, yeah, that definitely pushes more snaps Trenton Simpson's way if they do, in fact, go with the lesser safety route. I think that's a little less frequent with the big nickel. They didn't play a lot of big nickel once the second half of the season started anyway. So I could see them doing that. It's not too far-fetched to think. I think hopefully Roquan and Trenton have gotten together and they've worked in tandem. Hopefully they've gotten better at, communicating, and maybe Simpson's getting better as being a player overall. And this is not such a bad thing if they go that route. But certainly I think Simpson becomes a more, his snaps tick up quite a bit if they go to lesser safety route and keep Kyle Hamilton and Malaki Starks as your 2 main guys.
Yeah, the more I think about this too, Bo Bray just really does intrigue me. And look, a lot of people will say, what, an undrafted player in his second season? And I know, Sam, you don't have a ton of confidence just because of that, which I totally understand that. Like, especially with the Ravens and them competing for Super Bowls, like, you can't afford to have guys make mistakes. And look, we saw mistakes cost the Ravens their first 2 games of the season. If they win one of those games, we're talking about Baltimore hosting the divisional round instead of having to go on the road. So, there's not a lot of room for error here. But I'm super intrigued with Bo Braid for a couple of reasons. I think the big thing, and, scouting him, I thought it was going to be a later round pick, and I thought it was a steal that they got him as an undrafted free agent. But his ability to come up in the box and be physical and aggressive there, plus the versatility he has in coverage with the ball skills. And I think, Sam, there's not a fan base that appreciates ball skills like the Ravens do after having to watch Brandon Stevens in 2024. So, that first clip of Malaki Starks turning his head, what? He can turn his head for the ball. This is incredible. Like, Bo Braid, he can turn his head for the ball, which, you might think, okay, that's a basic skill. No, we watched Brandon Stevens for a full season. The Baltimore fan base appreciates that. So you have to be able to do that. I think Bo Braid does do that. And I think that if you want to trust him and figure it out, or if you want to go more of a veteran route, and I kind of talk about this with TJ Tampa and Chidobe Awuzie, where I expect Awuzie to get more snaps early on just because he's a veteran. But if TJ Tampa shows in his snaps that, hey, he's got this thing going and he's a good player, we could honestly see that shift, especially as you want to preserve a guy like Awuzie for December, hopefully January, February football. If they bring in an older safety here, they could say, hey, we're going to play this guy early on. We're going to get that veteran in there. Give Bo Braid some rotational snaps. But then if Bo Braid is showing, hey, he's the man here, he's the replacement, you can dial that back, which I think is why it's the perfect marriage of give Bo Braid and Sanusikian opportunities, but also don't put all your eggs in that basket, because I think that's a little reckless. You can have the best of both worlds here, I think is what I'm trying to say.
Exactly. And maybe I should step back a little bit with my comments. I think, training camp is the opportunity for second-year guys to come in and make a name for yourself and really show the coaching staff that you've learned from year 1 and year 2. Obviously, they had the offseason to get better and probably learn what it takes to be an NFL player. I always say, don't harp too much on what rookies do. It's very difficult to make that transition. Year 1 and year 2, that's when you really start to find out what these players are about. Bo Braid can come out and show that he's that safety. We saw what he can do in Maryland, so if you're a Maryland fan, you know what he's capable of. Can he put it together and make it known that, hey, you don't need to look too far for a safety. You already got him. So it could be a situation like that. And training camp will be the time to see that happen. I think even if they bring in a Justin Simmons, I think if Bo Braid has the type of camp that we potentially expect him to have, then it could be a situation where he is rotating in and eventually overtaking him. I'm not sure if Ardarius Washington was even going to come back next year, even if he was healthy. And maybe Bo Braid was already in the cards to be that next safety. Who knows? But this probably accelerates the process a little bit. That's life in the National Football League. And I'm sure both Braid and Kane are looking for an opportunity to make a name for themselves and potentially be a starter in this league.
Yeah, we'll see how it unfolds there, because there are a lot of different possibilities. And obviously, while they didn't lose one of their best defenders, Ardarius certainly had a big impact. And you're right. Kind of how we saw the Keaton Mitchell year that I talked about earlier, where he was back, he came back mid-season and it just kind of felt like, oh, where's Keaton Mitchell? He's on the field, but where is he? It didn't feel like he was there. For Ardarius, it might feel that way in 2026, where it's like he just has to trust himself. And that's just natural with athletes, where sometimes you're able to snap back in it and you're yourself again. Other times it's a lot longer of a process. I mean, Ronnie Stanley just put out one of the greatest player Tribune pieces I've ever read about his injury and how tough it was for him to come back and go through all of that. And, I'm so happy for Ronnie that he was able to get through that adversity, but it took him a while to get there. So I don't know what the future holds for Ardarius in Baltimore, but, I wish the best for him in his career and hopefully, again, a speedy recovery. Coming up, though, the final part of the show, the NFL schedule gets released tonight. So if you're watching this after the fact, you already know who the Ravens play, but Sam and I are going to do a little bit of predictions, what we want to see and what we don't want to see. So stay tuned. A lot coming up on Locked On Ravens. Back on Locked On Ravens, it is Kevin Oestreicher and Sam Njoku talking Ravens football with you here. Sam, the NFL schedule has been dropping over the last couple of days. In 5 years, we're going to have a game dropping a day every day in May leading up to the schedule. It just feels like that's the way we're going. The Ravens will play no international games in 2025, which is, in my opinion, good news. I don't think people wanted to wake up that early for a game, especially after watching that Tennessee game that was sloppy as all get out and the Jaguars game all those years ago, which is forbidden to talk about when you're talking about the Baltimore Ravens. But the Ravens, there was a schedule, was interesting schedule quirk, I guess I'll call it here for Baltimore that I want to talk about. They will travel the third least amount of miles in 2025. Now, the Bengals are significantly lower than they are. So they're not the team that has the least amount of miles in their division, followed actually by Buffalo. So it goes Cincinnati, Buffalo, Baltimore in terms of miles that will be traveled from, 32nd all the way up to first, which is actually the Chargers with 37,000. But that's pretty natural. The West Coast teams have to, bear the brunt of those miles. People might say, Sam, well, this isn't a big deal. Why are you talking about this? Travel's a part of football. I want to go back to comments that Michael Pierce had a couple of years ago, and that was the year that they traveled out to Arizona. They were going on those West Coast trips, and they went to London that year and played, and Pierce talked about how, hey, it could be a grueling part of the game there. Like, it's not an easy thing to do. So while it doesn't necessarily show up in the box score, how many miles you traveled, fatigue can certainly play a part in some of this. Travel can play a part in a lot of that. Preparation on the road can play a part of that. Not having to go through that grind, at least not having to travel far. I think that is, even if it's a little advantage, it is an advantage to the Ravens.
Yeah, and I'm sure Harbaugh would tell you, it doesn't matter. You go there and play football. It matters. It makes a difference. It is grueling to travel distances. Man, I travel from the West Coast to the East Coast and East Coast to the West Coast all the time. And I tell you, that jet lag is real. And to have to sit there and get ready for a football game afterwards, 60 minutes of running at each other, car collisions, every single play. Yeah, I think it makes a big difference. It makes a big deal. I'm not sure what the stats are with that. I'm sure if you're a bad team and you have the least amount of miles, it doesn't make much of a difference. But I'm sure that every little advantage counts. And I'm telling you, the Ravens are very fortunate to have this situation where they're not having to travel as much, more time to prep, get your body right for the game, not too much on the air, not too much dealing with, time zones and all of that stuff. So the Ravens are very fortunate. I think it's a good thing for sure. I know it doesn't mean much to the regular fan, but when you're looking for every single inch, remember the Ravens lost the divisional round by 2 points. Just a fumble here, a ball here. Every little thing makes a difference. Maybe if someone's a little more rested, they make the catch. Maybe if they're a little more rested, they make the turnover. So all those things I think makes a big difference. And this is definitely a positive more so than a negative.
And if you don't believe that every little thing makes a difference, I point you to Eric DaCosta claiming Deontay Johnson off of waivers after that whole thing happened. Yes. He was trying to do everything he could to get another comp pick. Everything does matter, from scheduling to front office decisions to on the field play. This Ravens team is trying to get any little advantage they can, and I certainly think this is one for them. Now, Sam, the Ravens will have a tough schedule. They're playing a first place schedule again here. They're going for their third straight AFC North crown, which has never been done in the division's history. Just going to read off the opponents quickly for you here. You got obviously the Bengals, Browns, and Steelers. That's your AFC North, both home and away. So at home, you also got the Patriots, the Jets, the Bears, the Lions, the Texans, and the Rams. Away, you also have the Bills, the Dolphins, the Packers, the Vikings, and the Chiefs. Out of these games, Which ones do you feel like Baltimore could be slated for prime time with? 5 is the max amount, if I'm not mistaken, of how many primetime games you can get. Do you think Baltimore gets that? And who do you think could be a possible option for those?
Well, the Bills and Chiefs are the two that come to mind immediately. Obviously, the Ravens played the Bills in the divisional round in the playoffs last year. Chiefs, first game of the season in 2024. So those are two very compelling games, and these three teams I expect to be in the thick of things come playoff time. So those aren't surprising. Also, the Steelers, obviously, there's always one Steelers game in prime time. The Bengals game, the Ravens, they threw up 3,000 points, I believe, those two games they played. So the league loves points, and so do the network. So I don't expect them to not try and get those two games on prime time, at least one of them. So I expect one of those games. And then afterwards, who knows? The Packers, I like the Packers a little bit with Jordan Love. That's a possibility. And I think that's pretty much it. I'm not sure if there's any other games that come to mind as far as what could possibly be a potential, do they play the Lions? I think they do play the Lions at home as well. So that's also another game if Fox or CBS doesn't grab it. Could be a potential primetime game. Obviously, the 66-yard field goal by Justin Tucker, everyone remembers that. And, of course, the butt whooping that the Ravens get the Lions a few years ago. I'm sure the Lions want to get payback for that, but the Lions, I think, will be a competitive football team again this year, and that makes for good television. So I think those might be the 5. I might be missing one, but I think that those probably are the best options for the league to get the Ravens on national television.
Yeah, I'm with you. If there was one more I might give, maybe it's Minnesota. Minnesota is an intriguing team. Obviously, that's going to depend on how JJ McCarthy plays, but maybe it could be. And we all know what happened all those years ago in the snow in Baltimore.
Oh yeah,
right. That was a crazy one. So that could be another. I see people talking about the Texans. I think the Texans are going to take a step back this year. I don't really see that as an option. So I'm in agreement with you. One of the Bengals games, one of the Steelers games, Bills, Chiefs, and then anyone, even the Bears, let's just throw the Bears in there. Why not? Any of the 4 NFC North teams, could be an option for them. Now, the Ravens have played Sam 2 times in a row on Christmas. If they put the Ravens a 3rd time on Christmas, I'm going to flip out. I said that like a month ago. I said schedule release is coming up. If that happens, it is awful. League is doing that one, obviously for the players, obviously for the whole thing. Thanksgiving is also another option. My big brain theory, I had a lot of big brain theories today, is that the Ravens and Steelers will be put on Thanksgiving to get back that 2020 COVID game that did not happen because the Ravens had a bajillion players on the reserve COVID list, and it happened on that random Wednesday afternoon. I feel like this is the year because I think you want to have the Ravens on at least one of Thanksgiving or Christmas.
Definitely not Christmas. I don't think there's going to be Christmas. There's no way. I'm with you. I love watching Ravens football. I can't do another Christmas game. Can't do it. But Thanksgiving, it seems like and the Steelers game seems like a very good place to put it. It's near the end of the season, a lot of playoff implications, just makes for good television. So, yeah, I think that if the league is gung-ho on getting Lamar Jackson on primetime television in the holidays, and I think that's what it is, I think Thanksgiving is probably the game to do it. So wouldn't be surprised if it's the Ravens and Thanksgiving, and Steelers seems like a great option for a game.
Yeah, 100%. Now, another big thing is the bye week, right? A lot of people have their opinions on the bye week. When is the optimal time for a bye week? Last year, I was upset the Ravens had a bye week so late, and then you get to the season, and that bye week could not have come at a better time. Like, it was the best possible time that bye week could have happened. I'm of the mindset, Sam, middle of the season is the best one for me, at least. Where that not week 9, 10, 11, that's optimal. Too early in the season, that's the worst, right? You don't want to have to get that early bye out of the way, and then you have to play all that football. Late bye is like the middle option. You have to play a lot of football, but you do get that valuable rest right at the end of the season. Where's your ideal spot for a bye week? Like, where do you want to see that bye week fall for Baltimore this year?
Depends on how good they are. If they got a chance for a first-round bye, then probably closer to the middle of the season works better for me. Definitely not early in the season. But again, you mentioned it. That late season bye came at the perfect time for the Ravens. And if they aren't going to get a bye come playoff time, then that's probably a good place for them to be. I'm in the conscious mind that I think the Ravens are going to likely fight for that first round bye. So middle of the season probably works best for me. I think that'll be great. Maybe week 9 works good. I think maybe week 9, week 10, give them a bye week in the middle of the season, get them charged up and ready to go and face their playoff run.
Yep, I'm with you. And here on Locked On Ravens, we will be live after the schedule gets released. So be sure to stay tuned for that. We'll certainly see what the Ravens have in store for their schedule release, which I think that is honestly becoming the most entertaining part of this, is all these teams releasing their schedules in fun and entertaining ways. But Sam, I appreciate you as always. Thanks for hopping on. On the way out, tell people where they can find you and what you're working on here.
Yeah, schedule's getting released soon. So find us at Ravens Talk Podcast on YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter. We'll be talking about the schedule, what our favorite matchups are, some primetime games that we could be looking forward to. So that's going to be pretty awesome to talk about. Also, AFC North Roundtable. We work with the other divisions, other teams in the division, and talking about football. That's probably going to be a little later on this month.
Links in the description down below. Sam knows his stuff. Go support him and all that he does. Sam, I appreciate you as always. And thank you to everybody who tuned in, watched, listened today to Locked On Ravens. Of course, we'll be back here later tonight live. We'll be breaking down the schedule, and then we'll have an episode on Thursday tomorrow about if the Ravens got the short end of the stick from the NFL, or if they end up having the perfect schedule. So be sure on the way out, hit the like and subscribe button in video form, follow along in audio form, and I will see you right back here soon on Locked On Ravens.